Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of T360's Management Talks. We've been running these about every week for the last couple of months and trying to keep our audience engaged with different management level topics and leadership level topics, everything from brokerage operations to technology to merger and acquisitions. I know we have a lot more coming in this spring cycle. My name is Jack Miller. I'm the president and CEO of T360, and today we have a special guest, which is Dan Breaux. Dan Breaux runs our T3 Talent division, and he has put together some thinking for leadership on looking at your talent, looking at what's going to happen in the year, thinking about how to approach talent a little bit more strategically. And we wanted to share that with the audience and make people aware that we have some skill set within T360 to help in the talent capacity. So, Dan, welcome. We're delighted to have you here, and I know we've got some slides to share and a little talk you've prepared for our group, and I'm really glad to do it. So, before we jump into that, why don't you give people a little bit of background on yourself, where you came from, what you've been up to, how you do your work in the real estate industry. Just give us a short synopsis of that to get us kicked off.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, Jack, for having me. This is my first go round being live with T360, so I'm excited to be here with the audience and with you, Jack. I appreciate it. I had a career before real estate that I won't go into that took me in a couple of different directions and had me doing some different things, but I entered the real estate space probably, 2005. So about 18 years ago, I did an about face in my career. I joined a home builder in Indianapolis, about $150 million company selling at all levels. Was right in the thick of that deep recession. Wasn't quite sure what I had gotten myself into, but I liked it, surprisingly enough. And a couple years later, I joined Remax Integra, which is a privately held sub-franchisor for Remax. They operate in about 36, now 34 countries. Ran some operations and some companies for them. And then I left at the end of 2021 and I started my own executive search firm. And I might have been just biased, but I had worked with recruiters my whole life, either been recruited by or worked with a recruiter to staff my own teams. And quite honestly, I thought I could do it better. I had some good success, but without, picking on anybody or the process, I just thought it wasn't as great of a process as it could have been. So I started my own firm. I got to know Kelly White, who's my predecessor here at T360. We would talk every now and again. And I learned from Kelly, even though I was learning and building my own business, I learned from Kelly that she had already built like an incredible practice at T360. And it was the way that I viewed myself and the company I wanted to build. And so when I met you, Jack, and we talked about coming, and as I've shared with you, you bought me 2 wicked good Texas burritos, and I said, sure, I'll close my firm and come work with you. So
thank you, Torchy's Tacos, for helping bring Dan on board. So yeah.
I go down easy, Jack, as you can tell.
Well, anyway, they do make a wicked taco. So, well, Dan, we're just so delighted to have you. And you had some thoughts. I think this talk came out of a discussion you and I had sometime around the end of the year about how to approach kind of thinking about your workforce for 2024. So I'm going to go ahead and share some of your slides, and then we can just take a spin through them. So I think, we titled this talk "Strategic Workforce Planning for 2024," and let's just jump in. So talk to me about your hiring trends.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with what we're seeing in the last year or two, and for the audience, this is whether you're a candidate or you're a hiring manager, you're a leader. It applies to you both, but it's really aimed at the hiring leader within residential real estate. Here are the trends we're really seeing. So this might not be news to everybody, but it's a good ways for us to start and just highlight the environment that we're in, because what we want to really get to is what can we be doing? What should we be doing as leaders at this time when it comes to people? So we're seeing staff reductions, obviously. Some people have hiring freezes, whether they're publicly stated or not. That's really common for me to talk to somebody that says, I'm thinking about hiring, I'm thinking about searching this person, but I want to hold off and see what the first quarter or the first 2 quarters look like. That's a really common discussion. We've had merging of positions, hey, Dan, I know you're doing this position, but you're going to have to take on this one and part of this one. So we've certainly seen that. I didn't mention it, but I think we've seen AI enter the picture a little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit, people trying to figure out, okay, I've got 2 jobs instead of one. How can I use AI to simplify things and make it easier? At certain positions, we've definitely seen compensation reductions. I don't know if the audience knows, but that's something we track, and we have some proprietary information about that. We're certainly talking on the talent team to people every single day about what the right compensation level is. Some people are overspending, underspending. That's a moving target. So that's an important trend that we keep track of. Obviously, if you have one job and you pick up another task at the company, there's some upskilling of talent that's happening. We've seen some people outsourcing talent, offshore, part-time, fractional. That's a really common thing. And we couldn't have a slide like this without stating what we all know is there's continued discussion about, is it remote? There's probably not a conversation I have with a candidate or a hiring manager that doesn't include, hey, this is remote, or it's partially remote, or whatever. It's really important to both the hiring side and the candidate side.
And I'll comment on, I mean, I know there have been some hiring situations we've been in where, the candidate pool, especially for your more talented candidates, they really want that flexibility they got during COVID. They want to be able to work where they are. And so for some candidates, it's become a non-negotiable where they say, look, I can do this job. I'm willing to fly in, but I need to be mostly remote. And that's a big change, I think, in our industry and a lot of other industries. So, I just think the hiring trends reflect the status of the market. People are looking for how to do more with less, and maybe they don't need as much staff because you're doing, 50% or 60% of the transactions you did 2 years ago. So I think it's common. Let's talk about what leaders need to focus on now. What's their focus?
So let's start with the big picture, okay? And I'll keep this short because we want to keep it short today. But I'm going to introduce a name to you, a guy named Brad Stevens, who was playing high school basketball when Karen and I moved to a suburb of Indianapolis in the 90s. He coached Butler basketball, did really well at national level. He went to become the coach of the Boston Celtics, and then he became and is now the president of basketball operations for the Celtics. One of his many jobs, and he would tell you the most important one, is he looks at the team. Who are the players? Who's performing? Who's not performing? Who's leaving? Who do I need to get rid of? Who do I need to replace? He's looking at every position 1, 2, 3 steps ahead. He's looking at his past performance as a team. What was last year's record? What do I want this year's record to be? What people changes do I need to make, both on the coaching staff and the player staff, in order for us to accomplish our objectives? So I will tell you, Jack, that if I ask most of the clients that I talk to, most of the hiring authorities that I speak with, what's your people plan look like for the coming year? What changes are you going to have? The most common answer I hear is, I think I'm good. I think we're solid.
Yeah.
And that's usually not the right answer, because it's not solid. There will be changes, and you need to be the one responsible and out front of those. So adopt that mindset of an NBA coach. And then lastly, I would say it's really common for me to talk to a senior level leader that has an impeccable plan. Usually T360's help them with it around technology. What are we using? What shouldn't we be using? What do we need to change out? When are those changes going to occur? But they don't have that same kind of approach often towards the most complex technology I think ever created, which is human beings. Yeah. So I think that's the mindset we need to start with, Jack.
It's very good. Okay, let's talk about where a few items to get started.
Okay, so let's get our head around this a little bit. I think there's a few questions that, as a leader, if you like the idea that you ought to have a people plan, is let's ask a few questions to figure out, okay, where am I? Let's get my bearings. One is, what's your turnover rate stated as a percentage? What is it for the last year, 2 years, 3 years? That ought to be a metric that we track. Okay. It should be tracked by organization. It should be tracked by individual manager, because that's where you learn where the opportunities are and where the challenges are with your leadership in the organization. Most people ask the next question, which is, okay, if I'm going to track that, what's the ideal level of turnover? Most organizations historically would say it's somewhere between 10 and 20%. Let me add a little perspective to you or to that. One is 10%, most of the time, most leaders will say that might be too low. You know, in a year, 1 out of 10 people or 10 out of 100 are probably leaving, getting promoted, and this would be turnover for any reason. Leaving, quitting, getting terminated, getting promoted, spouse,
Yeah.
whatever. If it gets below 10%, most leaders would say, hey, are we hanging on to people too long? Are there some underperformers in there that are hidden that we should really look at?
Yeah.
Maybe we're not developing people enough. And if it gets to 20%, that's a different set of concerns. But on that side of it, you think, geez, do we have some leadership problems? Is there a mission problem? Are we overtasking people? Why are people leaving at the rate they are? Somewhere in that 10 to 20% is probably where it should be to be healthy.
So tell us about this no open days concept. What does that mean? Where does that come from?
Well, I've probably stated it a little bit already, so I'll do it really quickly, Jack, but thanks for asking. When I was 30 years old and I was a first-time manager, I had 10 sales reps, 10 territories, sitting down with my regional manager to go over the goals. And one of them was, you will have no open days. And I said, well, tell me what that is. Okay. And the idea was that you would have 10 salespeople in their positions, full-time trained, selling every single working day of the year. And I thought, well, how is that real? How can you possibly do that? People are going to get quit, leave, terminated. They said it's your job to know. And so, again, that's kind of foundational about the NBA coach idea, but we should know and plan 12 months out to have a fully staffed, fully trained, high-performing organization. And that's just where the root of that comes from for me.
Got it. Yeah, that's good. And also, just to clarify, is the 10 to 20% rule apply to that? I took it to mean both staff and agents. I mean, it applies to both workforce. You should have some healthy amount of turnover on both sides. Is that right?
I think you'd be absolutely right on that, Jack.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that real estate really looks, it definitely applies to staff. I'm not sure that real estate looks at their agent pool that way.
The same way. Yeah.
Absolutely, we should track it on the agent side of it as well.
There's a cost, and we do this. I know that the brokerage consulting group works with this, that there's a cost to having an agent on your roster. And and also there's a cultural cost to having the lower non-producers, as part of your firm. So so I agree. I think a lot of brokerages are reluctant. I think now is a great time to make a bunch of changes, given where the market is. It's perfect. So let's talk about questions. You've got some questions for leaders to ask themselves or to ask their team. So let's dig into those. So take us through these questions.
Yep. So we're digging in just a little bit deeper. So number one, these are questions to ask. Do you have the right people for today, for today's environment to perform this coming year? What about the future? If you looked at your growth plan, like it's not uncommon for us, Jack, to work with companies that say, like here's one, I'm working with a CEO right now who said, I want to add 100 agents every year through acquisition. So we should be looking at our staff for today's business, but what are our staffing levels and needs for next year and the year after as we grow? So it's a current view and a future view. Who's being promoted? When are they going to get promoted? Who's leaving on their own? Who's leaving because we're going to decide that they leave, and when will that occur? And then this may seem like a silly question, but who's thinking about leaving?
Yeah.
And
because you want to know. I mean, I know typically on the staff side, people will give you that 2 weeks notice, but I think every leader on this call wants more than that in their planning. 2 weeks is not a lot of time to figure out a staff change, right?
It's really not. Well, Jack, that's a good comment. I read a stat, and I think it's on a later slide, but I read a stat from LinkedIn last week who said that 85% of employees are thinking about making a job change this year. And
Yeah,
that's up 27% over last year.
it's a lot.
So as leaders, we might say, I'm good for this year, but our staff, 85% of them are thinking about making a change.
Yeah.
That's something to pay attention to.
I think you had four more questions for the group, so I'll go ahead and flip up to your
Yep.
your next slide here. So,
And I might have hit some of these. Who's underperforming? I think one thing we hear in real estate quite a bit is, who are we hanging on to that's been with you forever, but really isn't performing anymore? And I think we're in a real relationship business, and we tend to hang on to, geez, I've worked with Dan for the last 40 years. I couldn't possibly make a change right now. We've been together too long, and maybe I've outlived the organization. Maybe I'm not performing anymore. So we should look, kindly at those things. Usually when you have that, Jack, you have people in the organization that are looking to grow and develop, but feel like there are people in the way who are not performing. And
mhm,
that causes some challenges in the organization that are not healthy.
yeah,
So again, when will the changes occur? And what's your backup plan for every one of these anticipated changes? Do you have a plan for hiring someone else? Do you have a hiring plan at all? Would you merge that position, eliminate it? Every manager at every level of the organization should be able to answer these questions for their own staff.
yeah. And I liked you included some tools that I think are some fundamental tools for to consider or to put in place. Let's talk about those. So these are the ones that you included. So talk us through the kind of fundamental tools for organizations.
Yeah, so you've begun this questioning process. You've looked at what your turnover rate is, et cetera, et cetera. And you say, okay, well, where do I start? Well, the first thing would be, do you have an organization chart? Because that maps it out. It puts every name in front of you in the organization in a way that you can think about it, see it, and discuss it with your executive staff. Do you have KPIs for each position? Um, I will tell you that most of the time, most organizations either don't have an org chart,
No.
and this would be any
Yeah.
level of organization, or if they have KPIs, which they usually don't, they're usually not up to date. So these are living documents. They have to be kept up to date. The KPIs change. Jack, if you ask me to do not just one job, but a second one and part of a third, we really need to have ongoing discussions around what the KPIs are so that I can be delivering against what you want me to deliver against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Finally, do you have a coaching system and a coaching cadence in place
Yeah.
that has your organization, both your leaders and your employees, looking at these key performance indicators every month or whatever the cadence might be to make sure that you're on track? That's
Yeah.
also something where when you have those discussions, you will flush out where some of the people changes you might need to make for whatever reason that might be. And then periodically, I think it's really important. I don't see it very often, but I think it's really important for an executive staff to sit down and look at the staff in the organization, and
Mm-hmm.
for each leader in that organization to be able to speak about the people that they have in a respectful way
Mm-hmm.
and how they're performing, how they're doing, what their tasks are. And this gives the executive, the entire leadership team, a view into the organization that can really help drive the business and make the changes that need to be made in
Yeah, I've
order
got
to.
a couple comments on that. I think the coaching system or cadence, I mean, best practices I know I've used are having a weekly one-on-one with every direct report. Doesn't have to be long. It can be 10 minutes just to check in. That gives you the opportunity. I think people wait too long to give feedback. They wait too long. You go, oh, well, they didn't do that right. And you tell them in their annual performance review, that's too long. You need to tell them right away so you can fix the problem right away. And then looking at those KPIs on a monthly basis. How are we doing? If it's a sales based role, if it's a transaction based role, if it's a some kind of workflow processing based role, how many files are there? How long is it taking to go through them? Whatever that is, having that. And then I think the executive reviews, I think that one's huge. A lot of times people only look at their org chart when somebody has said they're quitting. Right? That's not frequently enough. You need to look at that a little bit more often. So I like that, and having that as part of an annual planning process, very powerful. Great. So I think we've got a couple more. You shared a few more slides with us. You've got I think this is where your stat came in, Dan. You said it a few minutes ago, but why don't you revisit this?
Yeah, thank you. We'll just wrap it up with the next couple of slides. But one is, most common thing I hear is, I don't anticipate any changes this year. I'm good. And we got to remember that 85% of employees are thinking about switching jobs this year. That doesn't mean they're thinking necessarily about leaving your organization, but they're thinking about changing jobs. Like, let's face it, I think we're all thinking about that more often than we think. And I
Yeah.
just think those 85% thinking about leaving, and then a leader says, I'm good for the year. That's a contrast that we need
Yeah,
to help.
those things, that's a leadership perspective, does not match reality
It's
of
really true.
what's happening. Right.
Yeah.
So
And stasis or static is not necessarily, it's usually not a really good thing, because life and business do not stay static. So your people needs will not either. So good reminders for us, I think.
it's great. And then I think this is your overall summary. So to wrap it up here, Dan.
Yep. Just mindset of an NBA coach, develop a plan, whatever it might be, develop a plan using the questions that we've noted. One thing that we're working on at T360 is being able to help clients benchmark the staff size and makeup of their organization versus a similar sized organization or with a similar business model. Because a lot of times, we've sort of inherited a staff.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really sure, like, is this the right staffing level for this size organization? Well, how much am I spending per FTE? Am I high, low? Like, we're developing some benchmarks around that that we might be able to help you with to right size your organization. And then, as we talked about, put tools and processes in place, coaching, cadence, KPIs, org chart, to really create this as a people system that's ongoing and living. And if we can help, just call us for that. We're happy to help.
Dan, I have some questions. There's a few questions that have come in while we've been on here. One of them, some of these are some good ones. I really like this one. The person who wrote in, I'm not going to share who they are because I don't want to reveal anything about their company or anything happening. They said, I have a very high performer, but they are causing culture problems within the company because they can be very critical or negative, or they don't always play well with others. What's your best advice for that situation? If you got a high performer that's on your staff but is problematic, how do you handle that?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, you kind of touched my heart, because I'm not sure which one of us hasn't had a high performer. And we're probably all thinking of names like, oh
yeah, I know. I'm thinking of a name from that question.
right. So we all identify. So first of all, I would say, when we use the phrase high performer, but really causes a disturbance in the culture, I think I have to question, is that really high performance?
Is that high performance? Yeah.
Right. And that's probably where the person asking the question is coming from, is I like the performance, but not the culture piece. And I think as leaders, I keep this short, but we just have to decide, is that acceptable or not? And what kind of damage is it causing?
Yeah.
And I think you step back, you assess that. I think you have to work with the individual on it. You have to address it head up. But going into that, I personally think you have to decide whether you're willing to tolerate it anymore, or for how long. And I know personally, I've gone into some of those situations and addressed it and been upfront and said, look, this has to be corrected. It's non-negotiable. It has to be corrected. And it feels like something we should be able to address in the next 60 days or 90 days. And here's the support I'm going to give you to accomplish that. And
so you gotta get in there and do the coaching to correct the behavior that's not working. And then if it doesn't work, then you probably have to let the person go, or make a decision to move them into a role where they're not as engaged with the rest of the team. So
sure.
This group is not letting us off the hook here. Next question I got is, I have a long-term staff member who probably falls into your category of not really performing. The company, they've been with the company a long time. How do I let them go? What's the process? How do I do it in such a way that respects the contributions they've made to the company? So what would be your coaching for a person in that situation?
Man, these are good questions. I think I have to go, Jack. I have to go.
All right. Well, you can send me an invoice if if that's that hard of a question.
No, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
look, I think you have to handle it with grace. Everybody's watching, even though there might be people in the organization that when you part ways with that person will say to you, well, geez, that was a long time in the coming, or why didn't you do that sooner? Everybody watches with longstanding, valuable employees, and I think they ought to be treated like this might not come out right, but treated like the elderly. They ought to be treated with respect and with
Yeah.
care. And I
Yeah.
think everybody's watching. Remember that.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
also watch if you don't do anything, don't you think,
Yeah.
Jack?
Yeah, they will. It again, it goes back to company culture. If you say, look, our culture values performance, but we also value loyalty and contribution, and there's a balance that you have to strike there. And I know I've had to do that. I've had to come into organizations that have had a long-term employee who's not performing, and you set up a plan for them, you let them go, you may pay them some severance, but you do some things to say, look, we respect the contribution you made. The organization is different and needs a different thing now. So, but it is probably one of the tougher conversations managers have and business owners will have is that one because it involves a relationship that's valuable. So,
Well, and we could talk longer about that. If somebody wanted to call me or you about that and address it in private, we
yeah.
would sure have a conversation about that.
Well, that's a nice segue. If there are more questions, Dan is available. I know, Dan, you do a lot of kind of pro bono consulting with some of our clients who are moving into needing some more help with their organization. Feel free to reach out to Dan. This is all of his contact information, and there'll be a follow-up so that you can reach out to him. He's also, I think, Chris posted in t3talent.com. If you go to the T3 Talent website, you can reach Dan and any of the T3 Talent team to assist you with not just with hiring somebody. It may be like one of these tough questions that was posed here. Say, hey, I've got a staffing situation I need some help thinking about, and I know, Dan, that's your bread and butter. A lot of what you have to do is help leaders think about how they are going to move through making organizational changes and staffing changes that are necessary for their next stage of growth or for where the company is headed. So,
Well said.
yeah. So thanks everybody for showing up this week. We have more coming. I know, right? I was meeting with our marketing and communications team, and we've got a whole calendar of management related and leadership related training and events that are continuing throughout the spring to support everybody in this really interesting market of 2024. Those of you that are coming to the T3 Summit, we look forward to seeing you there. We've already got, I think we're down to our last 20 or 30 seats for that. So if you've been invited and haven't registered, get that done. If you would like to be put on the wait list to be invited, please reach out to our team. Again, you can go to t360.com and request a waitlist position for our leadership summit. It's a great event. We're really excited about it. We'll be in Phoenix this year, April 22nd through 24th. If you have gotten your invitation and haven't responded yet, you've probably gotten 2 or 3 emails from me or one of the staff. Get that done because we know we're gonna sell out. That's just where we are in the cycle. We know we're gonna be full. If it's important to you, we want to make sure you get there. So, Dan, thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing everybody on our future calls. And have a great rest of your week and go sell some houses.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye now.